What an amazing first panel. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and these videos that took us back in time, not only to 2007, but even earlier to when Steve was talking about his vision, one person, one computer, and making it very personal. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker for the fireside chat. First, we'll bring up John Markoff back here as moderator. Isn't he phenomenal? And for our next speaker, 5 numbers. 1 billion plus iOS devices sold to date. 70 billion, the number of dollars paid to developers of apps in the App Store. 200, the number of iPhone-related patents he's listed on as an inventor. 18 Tony nominations for 2 Broadway shows that he's produced. And 6, the number of continents he's visited in the last 6 months. Wait, there's one more number. And 1, by the way, he's only been attacked by 1 shark. We're very proud and pleased that he's agreed to speak for the first time in 5 years in public about the iPhone. Please join me in welcoming the original iPhone software team developer, a leader, Scott Forstall. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah. So I absolutely have to start by asking about the non-computer numbers. Let's start with Broadway. How did that happen?
I have always loved the theater from the time I was a kid. I used to act. And in fact, my wife and I started dating when acting together. And so it was always a passion of mine. When I had kids, it turned into a passion for them. They are phenomenal actors. And so we go to Broadway, we see a lot of shows. We go to England, we see a lot of the West End. When I left Apple, I was at a friend's birthday party, and I was introduced to a woman there I had met before, and we immediately hit it off. I knew nothing about her. Her name's Carol Schornstein-Hayes. And by the end of the evening, we're best friends. And she said, we should produce something together on Broadway. I thought, well, I haven't done that before. Turns out she has, to the tune of like 10 Tony Awards. She owns the Current up in San Francisco also. And so I said, I'd love to. Let's do it. So she started sending me scripts. And Fun Home was one of the early scripts she sent me. And I read it, and I was immediately touched by it. I mean, it's a powerful story. It's the true life story of Alison Bechdel and her coming out in college, her father living a closeted life and then committed suicide. Happy, uplifting musicals for Broadway. And you read this, and it's just the emotion that it describes and communicates with the audience just blew me away. And so I wanted to be a part of it. And I said, I want to make this successful. So we do it off Broadway. We start moving it to Broadway. I start finding out things like it's the first musical in the history of Broadway about a lesbian. This is a barrier that should have been broken well before 2015.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was important, but a few days before we opened, right before dress rehearsal, I was in the theater in Broadway, and I was downstairs in the bowels of it looking at all the technology, and actually there's all these like lifts and a lot of technology in service of art. Not for technology's sake, in service of art. And I came up and I walked out the door, and there was a woman standing there who was buying tickets. Our ticket booth was right next to the exit. And she had these 4 tickets in her hands. And she said, wait, you're coming out of the stage, you must be related to the show. And I said, yeah, I'm one of the producers. And she said, I have to tell you my story. My story is just like Alison's. I grew up in a rural town. I was closeted. I came away to college. I came out. I've lived in New York City for 20 years. I have a long-term partner. I go to every Broadway show, and I've never seen someone who looks like me on stage. And like 5 years ago, I started thinking there's something wrong with me. People don't like me, or people like me, because there's never someone like me on stage. And then I saw that Fun Home was coming to Broadway. And so she said, I rushed down here, and I bought these 4 tickets. And she's like, these 2 are from our partner and me, and we're coming opening week. But these are the 2 I'm really excited about. So these 2 tickets, I'm flying my mom in a month into the run, so I can sit in a Broadway theater and watch someone that looks like me on stage and have my mom know that I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the kind of power that Broadway can bring. And so it was great. And then we, last year, produced the first show in the history of Broadway, written with a women's team for the creative team, so a woman writer, a woman director, 5 women of color, the actresses, an amazing show called Eclipsed.
Will you do more?
Absolutely.
This
Absolutely.
Or are you doing more now?
I'm reading scripts all the time. I'm looking at different shows. Yeah.
And are there any parallels between designing software and designing Broadway plays?
It's exactly the same. There's a lot of black turtlenecks.
I bet
You know, doing a show, actually, every show is like a startup. I mean, every show is like a startup. You start with the creative types. You invent something out of whole cloth. You put a bunch of money and effort and time and your life behind it, and you give it out to the public, and you hope it's successful, and they decide. It's very much like a startup.
Yeah.
You just lose money almost always versus sometimes can make money in a startup.
Do you feel as nervous on the opening night as you did when you were launching the iPhone?
There's no demos.
Yeah.
I mean, when we launched the iPhone, that was quite terrifying. I did not sleep. I stayed in San Francisco so I could sleep and not have to drive up early in the morning, and it was pretty worthless. But every demo worked perfectly. Demos are very scary, but they're exciting. I mean, you want to see the real thing.
Yeah. You can't get okay. 6 continents and 1 shark. I'll bite.
Oh.
We can't introduce that without.
Yeah, this is a terrible story to tell because I've been trying to find more friends to go scuba diving with, and this is going to hurt that. I was down in the Caribbean recently, and I've been learning how to spearfish lionfish. So it turns out lionfish are these extremely poisonous fish with tentacles. Or these spines. They're not supposed to be in the Caribbean. It's come down through Florida, and they're taking over the reefs, and they eat all the native fish, and they move on and decimate the next reef. So there's a process where people are trying to kill them and control them. And so I was down there spearfishing, trying to get these, and we caught a really big one, and we cut it in half and fed half of it to another sea creature, and then we were on looking for grouper. The idea is you teach grouper to eat them, and then they'll get an appetite for it, and they'll control it themselves. So we're looking for grouper, and suddenly, here comes a shark, and it is mad. It is like riled up, and it's bumping against us and scraping us with its sandpaper skin. And it turns out we've dumbly been chumming the water with this half-cut-up fish. But I'm a photographer, and so I have this huge housing. It's an amazing aluminum housing with a big acrylic dome and these huge flashes. And I'm looking through this eyepiece, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I'm getting great shots. And I'm taking these shots, and it's going around. It's going to leave, and then it finds the lionfish and eats it right off the spear. And I'm like, this is great. And then it turns to my brother, who's taking video, and I think, I'm about to take a picture of a shark eating my brother's leg. Because it goes, and it ducks down toward his leg. So I click the picture right before it's about to bite his leg off. Great shot. And the flashes go off, and it startles it, and it turns and it comes at me. And again, I'm like, these are great shots. Like, I'm just taking these shots, and it's coming right at me, and it's 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. I'm looking through this eyepiece, and again, I have this big aluminum housing that can go down to 280 feet, so it's strong. And suddenly, I notice that I can see the shark's teeth on either side of the camera. And it comes down on my camera. And it sends me into a backspin. Luckily, my regulator stays in. And now I realize that was dumb. I'm very slow. And find my brother, and we swim off, and we find a cave, and the cave has a chimney, and we swim through the chimney, and we do our safety stop and get into the boat. And I looked at this, and it's damaged my very expensive, nice casing. I've already forgotten that it saved my hands. And I thought, this is terrible. And I thought, wait a minute. So I went home, and I found the last in-focus picture of the shark. I printed it out, I cut it into a circle, and I mounted it in my housing. And that hangs in my living room as the greatest picture frame of all time. Because you see its teeth, and when you walk up, you see the teeth marks of that on that
and
housing.
You didn't completely lose the camera.
It didn't actually puncture enough for enough water to get into ruin it. So I was out there with a 5D Mark III the next day, just a different housing.
Okay, back in the water.
So yeah, no, you gotta do.
I also want to ask about your path into computing, but I want to back into it. And I realize you went to Next in 1992. And I was thinking about that, and just in the grand scope of history and stuff, that was probably not the year I would have picked for someone to go to Next.
I'm very slow. I was graduating my master's, and there were two places I was deciding between, Next or Microsoft. I'd worked at Microsoft for internships during the summer, and I mean, Next, I looked at Next, I thought, it has incredible people. I will learn a ton. It has amazing technology. I will learn a ton. It has no customers. Hopefully I'll get paid. And I was deciding that, and I mean, my actual interview at Next was funny because I went in the morning, very first interview of the day. I'd been there 10 minutes. Steve barges into the interview room, grabs the guy that's interviewing, and takes him out. And they have this very animated conversation in the hallway. And I sit there waiting, and then the door opens, and Steve comes back in. That guy is not there. That was not on my list of people interviewing me. And he starts peppering me with all these questions. And I'm answering them, We actually kind of, we clicked. And 15 minutes later, he looks at me and says, I don't care what anyone says the rest of the day. We're giving you an offer. Pretend you care in the interviews, though. and then he said, we're giving you an offer, and I know you're going to accept it. Like the whole mind meld thing. And so I got this offer from Microsoft, which, so I turned Microsoft down. The next day, I opened my apartment door, and there's a box there, and I open up the box, and it's a very large dead fish from Microsoft.
Wow.
And I know this because there was a return address. One
Microsoft
away, it's from them, and I called up the recruiter, and I said, I've watched movies about the mafia, and I turned you down, and I just got a dead animal on my door.
That's intense.
What the hell? And they said, no. As soon as you turned us down, we just thought you're missing everything about Seattle. Oh. So we rushed down to the Pike Place Marketplace to throw the fish around. And they bought the largest king salmon they could find, and they packed it in ice, and they overnighted it to me, thinking, like, I will clearly change my mind because there are no fish in the Bay Area.
That's hilarious.
I did barbecue it that night, and it was great, but I still accepted Steve's offer as he requested.
So, alternative history. If you had gone to Microsoft, what would you have done?
There's a few things. I'd been working on the desktop publishing software there, and there was some multimedia video stuff that I'd looked at.
Microsoft was rocking and rolling.
Research place, what?
Microsoft was rocking and rolling. The research group had just gotten.
They were doing great. I think because I'd worked there as an intern, I had this idea that anywhere you work in engineering, you're going to do great. Yeah. And so, like, everyone at Microsoft, those were my friends. Like, they're all millionaires and buying, fancy stuff. And I'm going to school, and I can't pay for school. I'm taking loans out. I'm like, I can go anywhere. I'll go to Next. Of course, it'd be great. And it's like, yeah, we're going public in Q+2, and they always made payroll, but it was interesting.
So your dad was an engineer, but he wasn't a computing guy. Is that right?
Right. He was mechanical and industrial.
Yeah. But so how did you get into computing?
Unlike the previous panel,
You were not a nerd.
I didn't think I was at first. And my older brother, he loved computers. And so one year, he convinced my parents to take his birthday and Christmas and combine those plus like every relative who'd ever passed away, all the money he had, and get him a computer. And they got him a TRS-80. And he would sit there and program in his room, and I was like, I'm never going to do this. I'd go out and I'd build tree forts. And then one Saturday he was gone, and I snuck into the room, and I found this Byte magazine, and they have these programs you can type in. So I typed something in, I made it run. I was like, this is amazing. Like, you can just type in these random words, and it does stuff for you. That's pretty cool. So I went to school, and I checked out a couple books on computing, on programming, and I learned those. And I read this article about Alan Turing, who's always been one of my idols since then. And it talked about the Turing test. And so I sat down and I wrote sort of an early version of Eliza. I wanted to write something that would pass the Turing test with my friends. And that was great. And then I guess I was disruptive at class because suddenly I'd come to school on Fridays and they wouldn't let me in anymore. And another bus would come and it would take me to the naval shipyard, which is not natural, by the way, when you're in 7th grade. And I programmed to simulate sort of structural integrity questions for aircraft carriers, which seems very wrong because I knew nothing about this.
But they were
I could program, but these like 40, 50-year-olds would explain the math to me, and I'd program the math, and then I'd write the programs, and they'd test it on like one thing that they had done by hand, and then trust everything else worked perfectly. I'd be nervous if you're in the Navy. Because my next job, then when I was in high school, I worked at the Naval Undersea Warfare Engineering Station, writing software for weapon systems of Trident nuclear submarines.
Okay.
Which, again, like if you're in high school.
Did you have to get a clearance?
Yes. You can't really talk about it, but here's what I can say. When that happens, feds, people who wear suits, go to all your friends and teachers' house and ask them questions about you. Yeah. And you cannot tell them what's happening. So when you go to school and your teachers look a little flustered when you walk into class, that a person in a suit came and asked a lot of questions and maybe having a gun, you can say like, well, you just don't mess with me.
Yeah.
they're on my side.
So did you learn Ada in high school?
I did learn Ada when I was working on the nuclear
that could
have
have sent you back for years.
It was it was. I mean, it's an ideal thing. You go to this place where they give you the most computing power you ever want, and you can use it for as long as you want. And do whatever you want, and you can like, I need a $10,000 this, and they're like, just write it down. You write down, that thing appears. I mean, it's like Amazon for like technology, and it was like free, paid for by taxpayers like you. And you're guarded. The whole time I was there, I was always guarded by Marines with attack dogs and semi-automatic weapons, which is exactly how we protected the iPhone later.
What was your role at Next when you first got there, and what did you build? Were you on the Next OS initially?
I was. I did whatever they told me to do. I worked on the user interface frameworks. We called the App Kit, later became, sort of the basis for Cocoa Touch, later for the iPhone. I worked on designing widgets and drawing mechanisms for the base frameworks. Yeah.
Did it get you into design right from the start?
I always loved design. I always had a passion for design, and this allowed me to work on things that had a user-facing point of view. Yeah. So I loved that. Now I was working on applications, so I was working on, it's the widget, it's the drawing thing that's used by everything. But those all have to behave well so the user can figure out what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And is that where you learned your UI at? Had you studied it at all at Stanford?
Well, at Stanford, I took this I did this major called symbolic systems,
Yep.
which is like philosophy, psychology, linguistics, computer science. There's concentrations. There's an HCI concentration. I took classes in that. I actually did an artificial intelligence concentration, but I took design classes and always loved it. But yeah, I learned a lot by being around other designers. I've also always done photography. I mean,
Did you cross paths with Terry Winograd while you were at Stanford?
Yeah. I had several classes from him. He's a brilliant, amazing guy.
He'd made his HCI switch by then, probably. At a certain point, he left
He was
AI.
doing HCI, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, when I was there, he was doing HCI for symbolic systems. Yeah.
Neat. So when Steve sold, what were you in the loop when Steve sold Next to Apple? How did you hear about it?
So several questions there. We were in the loop in that we kept on trying to pivot, and again, we had great technology, but not customers. Hey, and so at some point, Steve decided, Apple, they need us. I mean, I've been looking. I cared about platforms. I always cared about platforms, and so I was trying. Really wanted this platform. We wanted developers out there, and we needed to be something other than Next to have that. But Next, again, incredible set of people. I learned so much. When we started talking to Apple, and they were already like in deep conversations with B to buy B, and they put those on hold. We would provide stuff, mainly Avi Tavanian, who, brilliant, has a PhD in mock. Like he's the ideal person. He probably did the most meeting and giving demos of this, and we would help out however they'd asked us to.
Yeah. So you came to Apple. Was Carbon something you did very early on, or how?
That took a little while. Actually, the last part of your last question, the way I heard was we were all sitting at Next in a big conference room. It was late December. It was 96. And I had a plane to catch. And I sat there. I was like, we got to hear this. And Steve's down there trying to hammer out the very last details. And finally, I had to go to the airport. I got on the plane. And for the only time in my life, when they had those phones on the plane, you could swipe a credit card, and it would just like empty your account. I sat there listening to it, and probably by the end of the hour-long thing, I was like, well, my stock just paid for this call. But it was very exciting, and I came back. So when I came back, then at Apple, again, I cared about platforms. And so I started traveling the world, giving talks, trying to convince developers not to give up on Apple. I was looking at making our software easier to code to, so converting some of it to Java or giving Java APIs to it, just doing something to keep that happening. And then at some point, I think I was in Japan, Steve took over, and I got something saying, come back, we need an OS strategy. And so we sat down with Avi and Bertrand and a bunch of others and came up with this idea. I mean, Apple had gone through many different OS attempts. There's Taligent and Pink and Copeland, and people in this audience, I'm sure, know way more than me. And we'll start tearing up if we keep on naming them. But there was a lot. And we were doing Rhapsody at first, which was just take Next Step and put it on Macs. Great hardware, great software. It's not a platform that supports the apps that are currently developed on the Mac. So that wasn't going to be a great long-term strategy.
Big guys like Microsoft.
Microsoft and Adobe and Macromedia, all these folks, they're just going to jettison it if you say, like, now rewrite all of Office for this.
Yeah.
So we came up with this idea of Carbon, which was you could take and do a minor modification to your application and get it to run on this new OS with all of the possibilities that you wanted in it. So it has preemption and protection, all that, but you still can write to the same APIs. And then on the side, we'll have this Cocoa thing, which is turned into the way everyone writes for iOS, and you can write new applications there much, much more quickly. But it would keep everything and move everyone along. And so then we spent a lot of time going to different developers and convincing them.
Okay, but let's move ahead. How did you either find your way to the iPhone, or how did the iPhone find its way to you?
Well, the iPhone had a very circuitous route by itself. I mean, I at that point was running like Mac OS 10, so I ran each of the releases at that point, and we'd been working on a tablet project, which has a really odd beginning. It began because Steve hated this guy at Microsoft. That is the actual origin
Was this
of
this
it. And
dinner?
it wasn't Bill, because he was starting to like Bill by this point. It was Laureen had a friend, so Steve's wife had a friend who was married to a guy who worked at Microsoft. Every time Steve had any social interaction with that guy, he'd come back just pissed off. And I mean, it was not in like Microsoft's, like, it was not good for them that he ever saw him. And he came back one time after seeing this guy, and that guy was talking about how Microsoft had solved computing. They'd solved like laptop computing, or they were going to do laptop or tablet computing, and they're going to do it with pens. And he just like shoved it in Steve's face the way they were going to like rule the world with their new tablets, with their pens. And Steve came in on Monday, and there was a set of expletives, and then it was like, let's show them how it's really done. It's like, the first thing is, they're idiots. You don't use a stylus. It's cumbersome. You lose it. You're always like picking it up and putting it down. We're born with 10 styluses. Style I. So like, let's use the ones that we don't have to sell. And so it's like, and this at the time, touch screens were resistive touch.
Yep.
Resistive requires you to sort of deform the screen. You have to push it down. And so if you look at it like text and everything looks bad, it's really tiring on your finger. He said, we need to do capacitive touch, and it has to be multi-touch. So we went to the hardware team and basically said, like, go do this. And they started, and the design team started building designs around this idea of multi-touch. And it was pretty interesting. I remember one of the first demos of this. You walked into a room. There's a giant, giant table. There's a projector on the ceiling, and you can you see a photo or something on the table, and you could move your finger around the table, and it would move the photo. It was super cool. It wouldn't fit in, your bathroom, much less your pocket, or your bag at the time. I guess if you're doing a tablet. But the moment you saw that, you knew this was the way to go. Like, that was cool.
So it was pretty quickly you were sold. You thought Steve was right, that stylus wasn't the right way to go. You saw your way forward.
No question. No question. I'd had devices with a stylus, and I hated them. Like a Trio, I mean, there's cool things about it, but like, you'd always lose that stylus, and you're always like, you're trying to pull out, and you're typing, and then you're going back. Yeah. It was just slow and cumbersome. So that thing was great. Now, how do we get to the iPhone? A few things happened at the same time. Apple was turning from a computer company, in fact, we were called Apple Computer Inc., to an electronics company, Apple Inc. And I think half of our sales at the time were iPods. So we were turning into this consumer electronics company. We were always looking at what was going to take over the iPod space. Like, was something going to cannibalize music sales and iPod sales? And the one thing that seemed like it might do it would be phones. Everyone was starting to carry phones, and you could try to put music on your phone. Now, you mentioned the rocker earlier. You can do it like that, and then phones would never have taken over anything. And I think that was like Steve had heard, the Razor, and the Razor was thin, and that's all it was. It was thin. Impossible to use, but it was thin. Yeah. And so he's like, rocker, okay, it's spelled like R-O-K-R, that's cool spelling. It must be just like the Razor, and it comes, and it's, like this big, and it's ugly, and 100 songs. So anyway, there was a thought that phones might cannibalize sales of iPods, and so we thought about that. But the other thing, I remember sitting with Steve at lunch one time, and we were both using our phones, and we both had these phones, and we hated them. We started talking, and we looked around, like, everyone around us has a phone, and everyone looks very angsty as they're using them. Like, no one, it seems like it's a pleasurable thing to use the phone, but it's a nice thing for communication. Yeah. And Steve said, do you think we could take that demo we're doing with the tablet and multi-touch and shrink it down to something big enough or small enough to fit in your pocket that'd be a phone size with that same touch technology? So I went back to the design team, and they took and carved out a little corner of it, and made this very simple demo. I'm pretty sure it was Boss who did it, and Boss is one of the best. And he made this thing. It was a simple list of names, and you would, with your finger, you would drag along. It probably had the rubber banding and all. I mean, it's magical. You dragged along, and you tap on a name, and it would slide across and reveal the card. So phone number, email. You tap on a phone number, and it would say calling. It wasn't calling, it wasn't doing anything, but it said calling. The second you saw this demo, you knew this was it.
The future.
There was no question. This is the way that a phone had to behave. Yeah. Steve saw it and said, okay, put the tablet on hold. Let's build a phone. Let's build a phone based on multi-touch. Yeah. And that's what we did. So immediately, the design team, we all got around and started designing the iPhone based on that technology. And the hardware team had the Herculean task of then shrinking that whole thing down into something that could fit in your pocket. Yeah.
Now, there was this other component of this. Steve famously said in 2005, we're not very good at going through orifices to get to the end user. Do you remember that? This was at All Things D in 2005.
Yeah. This is referring to all the carrier stuff.
Yeah.
The carriers, that was an interesting thing. Now, I have to say, like, I came into this as a platform guy and a design guy, but I knew nothing about phones. Like, I had no right to lead any team doing a phone. I'd never heard of GSM or CDMA before we started the iPhone. In fact, the first text I ever sent was on my iPhone. And because texting on everything else was horrid. And so we started meeting with carriers. We need some solution. So we talked about, do we do an MVNO? Do we license, do we white box a carrier solution through some other carrier? Do we buy spectrum and build out an entire network ourselves? Do we partner with one? And so we started looking at what it would mean to partner, and we'd meet with these carriers, and man, I had no idea. Carriers at some point realized that handset manufacturers were terrible. Terrible at user interface, terrible at consistency, and carriers thought they'd be better than that. And so they would give us these things, hundreds of pages of line items saying, here's all the things your phone has to do. If it's in this category, phone has to do all these things. I would look at it like, there's no way my phone does that. There's no way. And I look at the manual, I'm like, oh my God. If you do like 16 things and you do a jig, you can do multi-way calling. Yeah. It was unbelievable. And so we started talking with these carriers and we said, we know a little thing about user design, user-oriented design. And so here's the deal. You do the network. We will agree that the lowest level of our phone that talks to your network, you can give us a spec for that. Every single thing above that, you have no say. You don't even know what we're doing. Like, we're just going to go do it. You have no say. And, what do you say? And like, meeting end. We weren't really negotiating on that. And they'd say, like, well, what about this? And we're like, what about, like, no say, do you not understand? And when Singular came in, and they would send like 4, 5, 6, almost always guys in suits, to explain some of their technology. And when Singular came in, it was one person. It was this woman, Chris Rennie, and she had no slides. And she sat there and she went to the whiteboard and explained stuff, which was phenomenal. I was sold right there. Like, she knew the technology well, and they agreed. They said, okay, you'll decide all the top stuff, and we'll just make sure it works well with our network. And so they signed this deal with us. And
you hadn't demoed for them at that point. They had no idea what you were doing.
We hadn't really started it yet. Like, wouldn't it be fun to build a phone? Let's first have a deal. So no, we didn't show them anything. In fact, they didn't know anything we were doing at all. And I used to have to kind of enjoy this because their execs would call every once in a while with some brilliant idea. And they'd say, like, we really think email is going to be really big. So I think you should put a dedicated button for email on your phone. And I would sit there, and they don't know we're doing touch. They don't know we can update things. I'd say, like, yeah, I don't know if we'll ship with that, but maybe a few months later, we'll add a button, And they're like, oh, you're building like a Lego phone. Like, someone can go down to the stores, you come out with new app. And they can buy a widget, a little piece of plastic, and they can snap it on, and now it'll go to email. I was like, well, you think what you want to think. And so they had no idea we made this huge deal. So, we're going to announce it January 9th of 2007. December of 2006, we're going through creating the keynote for this. And Steve says, I think that Stan Sigman, the CEO of Singular, and Singular bought AT&T and rebranded itself AT&T, but it was Singular, should be on stage with our announcement. That sounds great. He should probably have some idea what we're announcing the day he comes. It's like, yeah, I guess so. We should wait to the last possible moment. So in December, Steve and I board his plane, and we fly out to Las Vegas. So Stan is throwing an all-Singular company meeting in Las Vegas. And so the two of us fly out so I can give this demo, so we can together give this demo. And so I have this metal locked briefcase, and I have 4 phones in it, and we get on Steve's plane, and so Stan is staying at the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if the cell reception is going to be there. I might get there, and it might not be great. And so I'll do demos on Wi-Fi just to make sure. Then I realized, well, Four Seasons charges you for Wi-Fi. So I'm going to get there, and I'm going to spend the first few minutes trying to type in a name. It's probably going to be Stan's name because he's in the room, and credit cards. And even when you have a working device, sometimes it doesn't connect right. This will be bad if it doesn't work. So on Thursday, the day before we go, I called up the Four Seasons. Now I can't tell them it's Apple because no one knows where we're going. In fact, we couldn't even give Steve's name when we flew. It was like I was coming with my buddy. And so I called up and I said, I'm an executive at Singular, and our CEO is staying in your penthouse suite, and I need to give a demo of this new Singular device, and so I need to be on Wi-Fi. So can you make sure that in his suite, Wi-Fi is free and open and just automatically connect? And the guy, IT guy, said, well, let me check back. Calls half an hour later and says, oh, we can't do that. He said, the Four Seasons and the Mandalay Bay share a single pay access point for the whole thing, including the Mandalay Bay big, lazy river. If we made it free for his suite, it would be free for the whole thing. And I said, well, it sounds like you found a solution. And there's beat. No, we can't do that. I said, you're the Four Seasons. You have the best service of any hotel in the world, and you're telling me for my CEO who's spending all this money and our whole company is staying there, you can't do this? Beat. Yes, Mr. Forstall, we'll make that happen. So we fly in, and again, we get off the airplane, and Steve gets out first, and I'm walking behind with this locked metal suitcase. And the limo driver is sitting on the tarmac and says, Mr. Forstall. And he's like, no, that's Scott. And he's like, come here with me. Mr. Forstall opens the door, and Steve walks around. And I was like, oh, my God, I am so in trouble. And we get to the Four Seasons. We go up, and we walk in, and it's Stan Sigman and Ralph de la Vega, who is now the CEO. And just the two of them, so the four of us sitting in there. And Stan, Ralph, you can see, is just show us, am I going to get fired for making this deal? And Stan, starts what's the battery life? What's, how well does it connect to the network? And you can just see Ralph's please. And then I answered a set of questions, and then he said, okay, let's see a demo. So I open it up, I turn on the first phone, and it instantly connects to Wi-Fi. Not a problem at all. And I go through and I give all these demos. They go through the roof. They are so happy. I mean, they're just we bet on the right horse, and this is the greatest. I mean, in fact, Stan is a big rodeo guy, and there's a rodeo that night, and he's like, we bet on the right horse. Come to the rodeo with us tonight. Steve made some excuse, I really need to get home. So we left. That's Friday. Okay, Monday, I'm sitting in a meeting, and my phone rings, and I answered it. And it's this IT guy from the Four Seasons. He said, "Can I please turn charging back on? We have lost tens of thousands of dollars." I said, "Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Great service, really appreciate it."
Yeah. That's a good story. Tell me about working with Steve. You were there for a long time.
Yeah, Steve was a unique person on this planet. He was the most intense person I've ever known. I've met a number of world leaders, and I can tell you from experience, having dinner with a world leader is relaxing compared to like lunch on a Tuesday with Steve. He was super driven, very demanding. He forced people to do their best, and there's a lot of this has been told. I want to tell a slightly different story. It's one I've never told before publicly, and he was really compassionate and dedicated to his friends and his relatives. And he saved my life once. And it was when we were deep into Mac OS 10, right before we started the iPhone. And I got sick. This virus went through my kids' school. And everyone at school, a lot of kids at school got sick, and they threw up once, and they were better. And it hit me a few days later, and I started throwing up. Once every few hours, once an hour, day after day, a little more often. Steve would call every single day. "What's going on? How are you doing? What can I do?" Then he started coming up with, solutions. You must eat this kind of apple ground up for 20 minutes at this. It was like very specific health solutions for this. Nothing worked. Week passed. Second week passed. I was throwing up every 15 minutes. I lost 5 pounds, then 10 pounds, then 20 pounds, then 30 pounds. I went to the hospital. They couldn't solve it. They finally figured out what it was, and it's a very rare thing where I think the Mayo Clinic had seen 7 cases over like a decade, and most of those people died.
But it was a virus.
Oh, a virus that stops your stomach from working. And just certain people, it stops your stomach. So I'm in there, and I'm dying. I'm in the hospital, I'm dying. And Steve calls every single day, asking how things are going. If I couldn't talk, he'd talk to my wife. And at this point, I'm throwing up every 5 minutes. I just want to die. I wanted to die. They gave me every medicine they could that they give to people with cancer treatment to try to stop the nausea. Nothing helped. And I would sit there like holding my finger, wanting to break it so I could feel pain as opposed to nausea and concentrate on something else. And they put a PICC line in to feed me directly through my superior vena cava because I was disappearing. And one night, about 10 o'clock at night, this is now months into it.
God.
Steve calls up about 10 o'clock at night and he says, "I have the best acupuncturist in the world, and I'm going to bring her to you tonight, and she's going to fix you." I'd never done acupuncture. I didn't have any reason to believe it would work or wouldn't work. At this point, I thought if someone comes shake a stick over me,
You're into it.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I had very young kids who just saw their dad disappearing and dying. 2 hours later, so Steve says "You're at Stanford Hospital," and he said, "Yeah, they're probably not going to love me coming in, bringing this other practitioner into the hospital. So if I get stopped, I'm just going to dedicate a wing." It's nice to have friends like that.
Yeah.
There was one time, a meeting we had at Apple, we were trying to price something, and Steve was arguing for some price, and I was arguing for another one, and he was arguing for this higher price, and I said, "It's too high," and he's like, "No, this is where people are going to pay this." I said, "I have friends, I have relatives who have very little money. Like, this is too high. I said, you're a billionaire. You don't understand. And he paused and looked at me and said, I'm a multi-billionaire.
But it worked.
He still went with his price. Okay, so he comes into the hospital about midnight, comes in with his acupuncturist, and he gets through everyone, and comes to my office, into my office, my room, holds my hand, starts talking to me, and he's like, she's gonna fix it. And I'm throwing up while he's there. I mean, it's just awful. And she comes over, and I said, does it matter if I believe this? Because I don't know if I do. I mean, I can try. Do I need to try to believe this is gonna work? And she just looked at me and she said, I'm gonna manipulate your involuntary system. Doesn't matter what you think, I'm gonna fix you. I liked the chutzpah. And she started sticking needles in my head, my back. The nausea went away.
Like, immediately?
It immediately started going away. She was there, they were there hours until sunrise. And for the first time in more than 2 months, I didn't throw up for like 8 hours straight. They left at sunrise, came back a few hours later, she did it again. I never threw up again. Oh. I drove, they let me out of the hospital the next day. She came to my house, did it. I got hungry that day. My mom baked fresh bread. I ate for the first time in 2 months. The next day, a nurse came to my house and took out the PICC line. She said it's the fastest in her 27 years of being a nurse she'd ever taken one out. I was 100% dying, and Steve brought this person to me and saved my life. So I will always, always owe him that.
That's amazing. What did the Stanford doctors say?
It's interesting. It actually depended on their age. People right out of med school think they've been taught the entire corpus of medicine, and they didn't believe it. Oh, you just happened to get better at this time. Any doctor over 50 said, there's a lot we don't know, and that worked. Like, empirically, 100% that worked. I can't explain why. I can't tell you if acupuncture works for other things. All I can tell you is I lost 60 pounds, and I threw up I started like this at the beginning of that, and I threw up every 5 minutes and wanted to die, and this person came in, and I clung on to life again.
Yeah, okay. We are close to being out of time. I have a lot of questions.
All right.
Let's go to the questions. Where do you see the future of Siri and other AI going? This sort of gets at what I want to answer.
There's a lot of that. I mean, Siri and other AI. There's Siri. There's the, can you ask something a question? Like when we were doing Siri, and I was blown away by it, having had my master's in artificial intelligence. When I saw Siri, I thought, wait, this is supposed to be 20 years from now. Like, I can't believe it's now. And I kind of thought, Google is, if you go to a library and you look up in the card catalog, what reference materials do you have related to this, and then you go and look at every one and figure out if it's right. Siri is, you ask a reference librarian and go find the answer to this question. I think that sort of thing is very, very interesting, and the more we can do to have that. Now, if you look at AI, I think there's a lot we can do with AI that we're not doing right now that I hope we get to. Okay. I can talk about a few if you want, but
let's go on. How did you react to the news of Steve Jobs passing?
Well, when he was sick, I would go to his house almost every day. That was for years. I mean, he went up and down, and I would sit at his bedside, and we would talk. And some days he couldn't open his eyes. Sometimes I would just be me talking. One of the things when we got Siri right before he passed, and he loved it because he was too weak to type, but he could talk to it. It's odd to say, but I was surprised. It just felt like he would always beat it. Yeah. I mean, before his liver transplant, he was so sick. And yet he would beat it. And he'd always talk about how he's like, I don't need to beat this cancer. I just need to make it to the next lily pad.
Yeah.
And then there'll be more advances in science. I'll make it to the next one, and more advances. So I was devastated. I mean, I felt so close to him. We spent so much time. I talked to him more than I probably talked to my wife for years. And I talk to my wife a lot.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And it was funny though. See, people don't realize how funny he was. He and I would go to lunch at the cafeteria at Apple all the time, and he would insist on paying. And I was like, it's like, you're paying me enough that I can afford the $8 lunch. But he'd always like, if he got his food before, he'd wait at the line for me to get up there and he'd pay. And he'd made it so you could pay with your badge. So you'd come up there and you'd badge in, and it would be directly withdrawn from your paycheck. And somehow I was like, why are you, I mean, like, really, like, go sit down, I'll be out there. I feel like an ass while you're sitting there waiting for me, and I'm getting, I feel like I can't get any long cooking food. And he said, no, this is great. I only get paid $1 a year. I don't know who's paying every time I badge.
That's great.
He was a multi-billionaire scamming Apple.
What was the most underappreciated advance of the original iPhone? That's a hard question.
When the original iPhone came out, the reviews didn't get it. The reviews talked about number of clicks. Oh, to send an email, it takes you, 6 taps or something. You have to tap into mail, you have to tap and tap, tap, tap. And so it was being compared against other smartphones at the time, Blackberry et al., according to the metrics people thought were important at the time. They didn't get it. What they didn't get was we were changing the entire paradigm. We were changing the entire way things were done. And it wasn't about how many taps. It was that someone who would never figure out that Blackberry because they didn't have a law degree and a law firm that made them carry that Crackberry around 24/7 would never figure out. And that's what I think people missed. And the sales at the beginning, it was nice, but it wasn't what I expected. Because the first time I saw the demo, the first time I saw us, with a working prototype, the first time I used it, I was amazed by it. I was blown away by it. And there's a question you asked at the last panel that, did you think it was going to be super successful? And for me, at some point, about halfway into our development, I thought, we're not using this like a real phone. We use it in the office. We don't use it outside of the office. And it's because we had all these 6 lockdown areas, and we had the sign that said Fight Club, because the first rule of purple is you don't talk about purple. And I thought, we need to take this out and use it as a real phone. And so I decided I'm going to do it. And I asked Steve just to make sure, and he said, sure, go for it. Give me one, too. And I said, not yet. Because there's all this configuration you had to do, and he wouldn't have, he would have been annoyed at that point. And so one day, I slipped an iPhone into my right pocket, I had my flip phone in my left pocket, and I walked out 4 lockdown areas into the parking lot. I was terrified. Because I was certain, this is the day I'm getting mugged on the way home. So I looked around, I went to my car, I drove a different route home. I literally talked to an FBI agent about how you try to be careful and look for people following you. And I got home and I closed all the drapes and doors, and I started using it. And I would use it all the time. But I always had, and only people at work plus Steve had that phone number. And so if it rang, I knew it was someone from work. I'd try to duck into a bathroom. I'd try to duck into, someone's house, into an empty room. And I'd pull it out and I'd try to use it. And it never felt like work to use it. It always felt amazing. It always felt special. And so I knew this is going to be huge. And so months go on. I'm using it every day. Finally, Steve's like, Scott, I'm the CEO. I get to make these decisions sometimes. You're giving me a phone. And so probably someone in this room set up a phone for him and gave it to him. And then the two of us were the only 2 people in the world who were carrying phones around, iPhones around. And he'd call me up all the time. I mean, he'd be like, 11 o'clock on a Saturday, and be like, I'm at this friend's house, but they're boring, so I'm in the bathroom, and I'm wondering about the touch sensation on photos and the way you pinch. It doesn't seem like it's quite right, and so I'd take mine out, and I'd sit there, and we'd be talking about it, and then he's like, oh, and I think the color of this icon is off by, a little bit, and so we'd sit there, and half an hour later, he'd be like, oh, someone's knocking at the bathroom. They must think I'm really constipated. And he'd hang up, and he'd call me back at 1. But using it in that context, it never felt like work. And I knew this is it. Like, everything's going to behave this way, and this will be successful. And, pricing and other things, there was a challenge to get it to the right business deal for a consumer to get it. But there was no doubt in my mind this was huge.
Yeah. I have a friend who refers to that as Cupertino class software. So this is kind of a trick question, but I have to ask it. Is that the same shirt from WWDC 2012?
That's a great question.
Can't believe it.
And when I find something I like, I buy about 10 of them. This may be that. I have many very, very similar shirts. Would you like to buy one?
So this is kind of repeating the question you just answered, but there's a kicker to it, so I'll ask it again. When the first iPhone reviews started to come in, and some of them were less than favorable, how did you stay positive? And then the next part of the question, how did you resist the urge to contact the reviewers and tell them they were wrong?
Well, Steve probably did that. I think he did.
Yeah.
I was unconcerned by what the reviewers said. I knew I'd used it. I knew how great it was. It just was irrelevant what they thought, because it was going to be a good product once people started using it.
Yeah. Assuming you're currently using an iPhone, is there ever a time you shake your head at something? If so, what?
That happens all the time. If you're a designer, if you care about design, you can't, go through any part of your life without shaking your head and thinking that could have been done better. And I thought that for our design, even the first version, the second version, you're always making it better.
Yeah. Andy Rubin, creator of the Android, came out with an essential phone a couple of weeks ago. And the question is, are you working on any new tech that you intend to announce soon?
I'm doing a lot of things. I'm doing Broadway. I do a whole set of advising of different startups. I am not currently building something myself along that line.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as you know.
Yes. Yes, we'll go with that. What does artificial reality have to do right in terms of design to appeal to you?
Artificial reality? You're saying augmented reality?
It says artificial reality.
Well, that sounds scary. That sounds like Black Mirror.
VR.
I think there's VR and AR, so virtual reality, augmented reality. I think augmented reality is very interesting if there's a form factor that makes sense. If there's not, then it won't succeed. But I think the idea of augmented reality, God, it's stuck in my head, is a really, really good one. Again, as long as it doesn't go all Black Mirror on us.
Yeah. There was a period like 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe longer, that skeuomorphic design was super controversial. What do you feel now about?
I had never heard the term skeuomorphism until years after we built the iPhone. And the first time, that's a horrible word, isn't it? Like, it sounds like
I had to look it up.
Or morphing something. It sounds unnatural. It just sounds terrible.
Yeah.
When I look at good design, I look for something which is easy to use, approachable, friendly. You can use it without a manual. It's fun. If you look at the designs we did at Apple, we talked about photo-illustrative designs. We talked about metaphorical designs. And those were infused into the design sense of Apple by Steve Jobs since the original Mac, if not earlier. Yeah. The original Mac had a desktop and folders that looked very much like the desktop on which that Mac sat. Yeah. And so we used these design philosophies It doesn't mean that we loved every single part of it. It doesn't mean I loved every single part of it. There's definitely things that I was less a fan of than others. But we built these designs that worked. And how do we know they worked? I mean, you just had to watch people use it. I remember when we shipped the original iPad. And within a week or so, I got these 2 emails. And one was from this guy who had a 2-year-old daughter. And he had bought a new iPad, and he'd loaded it up with a set of apps and for her. And then he videoed handing it to her and having her use the iPad for the very first time. This is a 2-year-old. She takes it, and she looks, and she slides to unlock because the UI told her what to do. It animated. It had a little knob. She knew exactly what to do. She slid to unlock. She didn't have to read it. She couldn't read. She went to the home screen. She flipped through a few home screens, tapped on an icon. She it came up, started playing a game. So a 2-year-old could use it. On the other side of that, the same week, I got an email from this woman who was 99 and a half years old. She said she was in her 100th year. And she was this voracious reader. But about a decade earlier, she got cataracts, and she couldn't read anymore. And she wasn't a candidate for whatever reason for surgery. And even if she got printed books with large text, she couldn't read it. So she, for a decade, hadn't been able to read. She used to love to type on her typewriter, and she'd write limericks. But she had terrible arthritis, and she couldn't type anymore. The day the iPad came out, her family bought her an iPad and loaded it up with books. In that first week, she read 2 novels for the first time in a decade because she could make it big enough and it was bright enough they could get through the cataracts and she could read. Because it was a touch screen, she could type on it, even with her arthritis, because she just had to tap. She didn't have to put pressure on it. So she wrote me this email with this limerick, and the limerick described how this iPad had reconnected her in her 100th year to reading and writing.
That's wonderful.
We knew we were doing something right with the user interface design. The team was amazing. We knew we were doing something right.
Yeah. There are other good questions, but we're running late, so we probably should.
Before you,
okay.
Let me say one last thing, which
yes.
is, I mean, I'm sitting here. Earlier, there were 3 people. But when I look out here, there are so many people who are the ones who actually the heroes who made this happen. Like, we had this hyper collaborative team of people who dedicated their lives for years to make this product a success. And it's not one person or 4 people. It was hundreds and thousands of people even that made this happen. And so I'd like to applaud everyone here who is a part of it, because you're really the ones who made it possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. Good job. Thank you.